Hey everybody! Today we're going to talk about infrastructure orchestration and how that is done with Humanitech, and in particular how that relates to what you're doing today. If we're looking at a common setup and the most common setups that we see in teams today, this is what the situation usually is. If a developer requires infrastructure resources such as a DB or a cluster, a file storage, a DNS, or an entire environment, they have basically two options. Option number one, try to get the resource themselves. Go into the AWS console, try to make sense of what's happening and create it manually. Execute some infrastructure as code files, Terraform maybe, and then hope everything is fine, or run on bash scripts. Now, the problem with that approach is that it's really hard to govern. It's a security risk because that means that security has to check all of these resources manually. And it makes the whole thing very, very hard to maintain. It's also a lot of cognitive load for the developers because they need to understand all of these things conceptually to actually operate them. Now, the second option they have is to go to their operations team and say, hey, I need a new environment. Can you help me? The problem is that that means operations basically becomes ticket ops. They're tasked with doing this, doing that in a very manual, very repetitive fashion, and it keeps them from doing all of the things that they should actually be focused on around automating other workflows. It also poses the problem that developers have to wait all the time. Waiting times high, operations frustrated, not really cool. There is an approach with an internal developer platform that we believe makes things significantly easier. Rather than actually having developers talk to operations or doing things themselves, operations teams codify against the platform API what happens if a developer comes with a certain request. Let's take an example. We have developer A with role-based access control B, and the developer needs an environment of type C. Now, the platform API has this information codified and says, okay, no problem. I need to stand up a feature environment of this type. Role-based access control is granted. Let's go. It will now execute so-called drivers. Drivers are little web-accessible endpoints that can manipulate everything that is connected to the internet, really. Drivers can work on themselves, or they can intersect with your existing infrastructure as code setup, such as Terraform, TerraGrunt, Pulumi, CloudFormation, really whatever you're using. So if the request from the developer comes in, the platform API will fire off several drivers to make sure that there is a new namespace in, say, GKE, that there's a Cloud SQL with preceded data stand up, that the images are pulled from GCR, and that there is Cloudflare provisioned and configured. It will return all of the information, DB name, DB users, as secrets, inject them into the containers, and then serve everything to the developers. Now, this approach makes the whole thing much, much easier to maintain, much more secure, because operations and DBA teams can security vet everything beforehand. And it eliminates all of the waiting times because developers aren't depending on actual humans to stand these things up. We'll show you how that actually looks in the product and how this is used on a daily basis in one of the upcoming videos.